Let's go back to the parliamentary precinct where my colleague Nompumelelo Siziba is standing by. Nompumelelo, over to you.
Thanks very much, Nastasia. And as I was saying, I'm in conversation with Pieter Janse van Rensburg. He's a director at AJM Tax, and we're talking matters tax. Thanks very much, Peter, for joining us. Sure. So what about the issue of income tax brackets? Do you think that the Finance Minister may adjust those? Obviously, we're experiencing higher inflation these days.
I'm not expecting an increase in the marginal tax rate, the current 45%, which is our uppermost limit bracket. I'm not expecting any increases there. To be quite honest, it's going to be interesting to see what the Minister does with the individual's tax bracket combined with the predicted reduction in the corporate tax rate from 28% to 27%. There's always an interesting interaction between the rate for natural persons and the rate for corporates. But as we stand today, I'm not expecting an adjustment in the marginal rate, nor, unfortunately, an adjustment for bracket creep. What we will, however, see is the traditional increases in the contributions for the road accident fund, approximately 15 cents per litre, and then as well on the general fuel levy, also an additional 15 to 20 cents per litre. So although we won't necessarily see any relaxation from a direct tax perspective, those indirect taxes unfortunately will hit consumers very hard.
That is unfortunate. And the sin taxes, of course.
Of course, there was a call from the South African breweries and other associations in the liquor industry earlier this week to at least keep excise duties stable at this stage. Unfortunately, I'm not seeing that. Over the last couple of years, we've seen the traditional increase along with the inflation, with the inflationary or even above inflationary percentage.
Yes.
And I'm expecting the same from Minister Godongwana today.
Okay. So, of course, President Cyril Ramaphosa, he did announce at the SONA, the State of the Nation, that indeed there's going to be an extension of the social relief of distress grant until the end of March 2023. So that's a given. So the minister's just going to be rubber stamping that and telling us what that means in terms of rands and cents. But from a BIG perspective, a basic income grant perspective, which of course many commentators say is not sustainable because we don't have sufficient economic growth. If indeed we were to go down that policy route, how do you think that should be funded?
It's very interesting that the fact that the basic income grant hasn't been formally put into action. Now, I think it's much of a muchness really whether we extend the social relief grant or we introduce a basic income grant. At the end of the day, it is a mechanism to assist the poorest of the poor. So the funds have to come from somewhere. I'm not seeing it from an indirect tax perspective necessarily. For example, a general increase in the value-added tax rate. We're not expecting that. What could be used as a funding mechanism is if we introduced additional levels of value-added tax. We currently have two rates in South Africa, a 15% and a 0% rate. So what could be considered to fund that basic income grant mechanism is a higher level of value-added tax on specific luxury goods. The Democratic Alliance, interestingly enough, came out with statistics earlier this week where they proposed that the basic income grant should not be funded from a revenue side, in other words, additional taxes, but rather from a savings perspective. And they outlined a plan in terms of which 200 billion rand can be saved over the next 3 years. So it's an interesting dynamic between those persons that think it must be funded from an income perspective and those that think it can be funded purely from a savings perspective.
And then lastly, not getting too technical, just tell us what your expectations are around exchange controls and why the South African public should be interested.
South Africa is one of the very few nations globally that still has exchange control in place. Our exchange control system is approximately 100 years old, so it's a very archaic and outdated system. Now, 2 years ago, Minister Mboweni announced measures that will relook the exchange control system and exactly how a capital flow management system will be introduced. Now, the reason why the public at large and the corporate and commerce industries are very eager to see that happening is that currently the system of exchange control works that everything is essentially prohibited from an exchange control perspective, meaning currency flows cross-border, and changing that to a system where everything is allowed unless it's specifically prohibited. So I think the mechanism that they want to use is, rather than creating anxiousness around exchange control, really opening up our avenues for that and promoting income flow both in and out of the country to achieve that balance of payments.
Okay, super. Thank you very much, Peter, for your insights there around tax issues. As I say, I was speaking to Pieter Janse van Rensburg. He is a director at AJM Tax. And in the background, if you can hear, we still have the EFF in the background protesting. Of course, they're protesting about the issue of the government borrowing money from the IMF and the World Bank. They say this isn't right because they're imperialist organizations which are influencing government policy.